Welcome to the ExecMBA Podcast. I'm Brett Twitty, Director of Admissions for the Executive Formats of the Darden MBA, and you are listening to a new episode. So in this episode of the podcast, I'd like to continue our look at entrepreneurship and the executive formats with a conversation with Ron Cook. Ron is a student in our class of 2020, and he is part of a startup in Kenya. And Ron and I recently sat down to talk a little bit more about his career, how he decided to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, and a little bit more about his startup. I think you're going to be interested in hearing what he has to say. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Ron Cook. Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brett.
So good to have you here. How are things going? Busy?
A little bit.
All right. Well, we're going to get into that. So for our listeners at home, tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to Darden.
Sure. So my experience prior to Darden was primarily in finance and accounting. I worked in public accounting before moving on to industry, real estate specifically. Worked in financial planning and analysis, lots of pro forma modeling, nerdy Excel work and accounting work. And I'd always toyed with the idea of an MBA. I chose to take a master's program before doing the MBA to sharpen the nerdy accounting skills. And some time went by and I started to see that there was a leadership component or je ne sais quoi that I wanted, that I felt I needed some polishing on, and looked at a few programs and clicked immediately with the Darden folks. And it was a very easy administrative admissions process, very connected group, dedicated staff that made the decision really easy for me.
Well, we're so glad that you're here. So when you think about, you had options, right? You had either our Executive MBA or Global Executive MBA format. Noted at the outset that you're a GEMBA format student. One of the questions we get from prospective students a lot is, why do people choose GEMBA? So why did you choose GEMBA?
It's interesting. I think the world is too small to stay in one corner, and I love travel. I think that while the EMBA program exposes you to a ton of people in the domestic region in the four corners of the United States, and the companies that are typically within the case format are domestic companies. However, the idea of traveling and seeing what those companies that are outside of the U.S. actually operate under, like what's their traffic like, what's the day like for an executive who's crossing a huge city the size of New York, or not even having the normal day-to-day transportation options that we have, right? And I think that the GEMBA format affords the curious, what's out there mind a little bit more to chew on. And I saw that as an opportunity to expand my horizons professionally and also kind of meet a travel bug.
Yeah, you'll get to go to 4 locations. You've already been to 1. So we're having this conversation after you've wrapped up quarter 2, which was Brazil for you. So as Ron noted, our Global Executive MBA format students, they travel, more than any other students in the program. Our Executive MBA format students will do 1, maybe 2 of the 4 global residencies. But if you want to see the world, no better way to do it than with your Darden classmates. So tell us a little bit more about Brazil. I mean, I've had a couple conversations with people, and we've run a blog post about it. Sounds like an intense, but a really fun week.
Brazil was great. Sao Paulo was our first stop. We had a great opportunity to meet some companies there that were doing some amazing work, even under, I suppose it would be considered still developing conditions, at least politically. And it seemed to be that there was an enormous amount of optimism. That was the first thing that I took note of. And you'll hear these executives speak about their headwinds and how they were going to adjust their plan A to plan B should those headwinds intensify. That was great to hear. And also being able to connect with my classmates. It's amazing how quickly you can find affinities and begin to understand people's personal context, familial context, professional histories, and gain an appreciation for how they've gotten to where they were and why they chose Darden and why they want to improve their leadership and management prowess.
So there is something unique about being away from your everyday life, in a foreign country, slightly different time schedule, certainly, you don't have the same sort of access to people that you have when you're here, maybe for a domestic residency. So it sort of creates an immersive environment, it sounds like.
I'd agree. And you could see that by the end of the trip, when we had moved on to Rio, that folks had bonded, and you could see some more social activities, I guess, spawning from those relationships that had started from the earlier part of the week. So no better place than Rio. The sun finally came out on Saturday. It had rained nearly the entire time we were there, but we finally had the sun come out, and some folks were out and enjoying themselves, and that was great.
Yeah, you get two locations. If you're curious a little bit more about sort of from a travel standpoint, how our GEMBA format works. So in our location, in our residency locations, you typically will visit two cities, right? So Ron is reflecting on Brazil, where they went to Sao Paulo and Rio. Next up for him is China in Q4, and we go to Shanghai and Beijing. So are you looking forward to that trip?
Absolutely. So this will be my second time going to Beijing and first time in Shanghai. So I'm looking forward to seeing the business context. Last time was personal, and this will be great.
So you also are someone that has a business that you're involved with, an entrepreneurial venture that has certainly a global dimension to it. So you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Our little startup is a organic pesticides business, and it's based in Nairobi, Kenya. The story is that a group of folks that I was connected with from a faith-based perspective ended up going to Kenya after being redirected from Ethiopia due to some political unrest. And we were doing outreach in terms of business advisory to some of the small business owners in Kenya. And we were talking to farmers and a lot of kiosk operators, oil transporters, motorbike delivery folks. But one thing that kept coming up was this idea of selling flowers. And we were thinking to ourselves, this is low margin. Why would you spend time selling flowers? Well, we decided to poke on that idea a little more. And what we learned is this chrysanthemum, once dried, has natural insecticide and pesticide capabilities. And Kenya had been a long time, I guess, user and distributor of the flowers up until the early 2000s. There was a change in, I guess, leadership, and the commodity markets were nationalized, and the prices tanked, and so the farmers stopped growing that crop. So fast forward, we decided to say, hey, what would it take to plant some more? And those conversations caught wind, and some of the local folks in government there decided to support and drum up support for the farmers to plot some seeds. And we ended up ordering some equipment, getting some space. And now we are finally to the point where we can run a little bit of test concentration on the pyrethrin extract. And that will hopefully be distributed to some customers who are, I guess, trusting enough to give our little fledgling startup a shot.
Wow. So we're sitting here in Roslyn. You're based in the Washington, D.C. area. It's a little complex, helping run a business. I mean, obviously the world's smaller, right? And technology exists. But how do you stay engaged with a startup that's maybe halfway around the world?
Sure. Well, one of the biggest things is to stay on, checking in with each other through WhatsApp usually. Emails for longer, text, and then OneNote is great for swapping ideas back and forth. At this stage, a lot of what we have to do is make sure that we understand what we're doing. It's staying connected internally. There are 6 folks on the ground there, 2 of which have uprooted and moved to Nairobi. 2 of them are native Kenyans. And then us other two are travelers.
Do you feel like your experience at Darden has, enhanced your startup experience and maybe shifted your perspective on some things or brought a new perspective?
Absolutely. The thing that I appreciate about Darden is the question is almost more important than the answer. And during our case discussions, typically the question is what guides the rest of the conversation, more so than, okay, that's a great answer. And I think when I started, I thought of myself as more of okay, I know how to do finance. I know how to do strategy. Let's apply that to Kenya. Now I find myself asking more questions about why do we do capital allocations this way? Does that apply as well in Kenya? And is there a better way that fits their profile? That's just one example. And I think Darden has poked the bear, so to speak, on enhancing that question asking, affirmative inquiry habit.
You're right to note the questioning aspect of the case method, right? It's essentially Socratic learning, which I'm not sure if that helps people better understand it, but it's rhetorical questioning, right? So just a series of why questions, and why do you think that, and what do you think we should do here, and why is that what you would recommend, and that sort of structured problem solving that comes with just asking questions.
Absolutely
makes you a better leader, makes you a better thinker, problem solver, and collaborator.
I'd agree.
So, how would you explain? I mean, so obviously, one of the things that we think is a big value add for students considering Darden is the case method, right? So, what would you say have been the biggest takeaways for you outside of sort of, this new orientation towards asking more questions? Anything else that has been valuable for you, as a result of that learning experience or through the learning experience?
I'd say that reading a case by yourself will give a baseline understanding of the dynamics that are underneath the text. But being in a room with, 30, 40, 60 other people who read that exact same case, and you have 30, 40, 60 perspectives to draw from. And when you pile those together in an hour case discussion, some really valuable insights pop out. Every single case, regardless of whether I was interested initially or not, I've always walked away having learned something either about myself, about the industry, or about my classmates.
That's a huge deal, right? Because the people in the room, they do something different than what you do. And that's a big part of the value, right? You described your background, that you had done a fair amount of work in finance and accounting. I'm sure you're popular with your classmates in some of the quantitative courses, but they bring things to the table that might be a little bit different than what you've experienced.
Absolutely. And so a good example is we did these little briefs before we went to Brazil, and everyone picks an industry or a topic and you collaborate on those. I remember writing my piece, and then one of my classmates completely turned it into this masterpiece of eloquence with the way it was worded. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, the next time I need feedback on how to present something, you are going to get my call.
Yeah, so you do have an appreciation. I think one of the things that's come up in some of these conversations, you have an appreciation for what you do really well, and maybe an appreciation for your blind spots or what other people can do to help you. And when you think about putting a team together, that has a tremendous value.
Absolutely.
So what are you looking forward to? I mean, you're now, hard to believe it, 1/5 of the way through the program. What are you looking forward to about the next 16 months or so?
I personally want to know each one of my classmates. And that might be a tall order because there are 130 of us. But I'd like to personally get to know each person. I'd also like to be able to compound what I've learned from the first few classes and have that carry forward throughout the next, 4/5. And I think what I'm hoping is for a synthesis to take place between the coursework and my day work that I'll be able to carry with me long beyond Darden.
Yeah, I think we do talk about that sort of real-time return on investment, and it feels real to me. I mean, I'm not in the program, but I'm certainly around a lot of people, and you do hear students say, like, we talked about this thing in class, then I went to work that next week, and maybe we weren't having the exact same discussion, or maybe we were. Is that something you experienced in the program?
Absolutely. We had to make a decision on a few alternatives for a particular client group. And one of the decision analysis models actually came in handy for that. And it made either way, I'm sure we would have chosen what we chose, but at least it added a bit of rigor around how we decided to go the path we went. Yeah,
decision analysis, one of the first courses you take in the program. It's probably one of the more challenging courses, I would say, just based upon my conversations with students. Did you enjoy it?
I did. We had Manel, amazing, great mind. He made the class fun. And of course, I like numbers. So being able to have the story attached to the numbers was great.
Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit more, because you do take a fair number of quantitative courses up front, right? Sure. A lot of it is setting sort of that foundation for what you'll do later. And DA is a class full of spreadsheets and numbers and calculations, statistical work. How does something like that work in the case method?
It's interesting. I wondered the same before I started. And I think that what I appreciated about the case method in a quantitative context is the numbers do have value beyond the obvious. So you know that there are statistics that are backing up a decision. Are they the right statistics, right? Are those values that we're drawing from a reflection of our like qualitative values? So it helped me take a second step beyond the numbers and value opinions about some of the subjective activity that takes place maybe under the surface.
That's really interesting. So I think there's I think most people have a tendency to focus on just, well, what are we deciding here? What's the decision? But it sounds to me like you're suggesting that the class got you to think about, let's go even further back in the process. You know, what are we capturing? Why are we capturing that data? You know, why are we choosing to look at it? Does it make sense in light of what we're considering here?
Absolutely. A good example is we had a discussion, maybe a 2-3 minute discussion in class about which curve would be the best fit and why. And it was great because the data can be shaped according to how you would like to shape it, almost like clay in some instances. And that was great.
So the communication aspect of the program seems to be huge for students. I had a conversation with a faculty member yesterday, and he was saying a lot of the value for students is developing their executive presence and getting comfortable articulating, their thoughts in front of a group of people, sort of explaining why they're thinking what they're thinking. And do you see that for yourself? I mean, I would imagine in that curve conversation, you have different opinions and you have people basically trying to convince their classmates, no, this is why I think you should think of it the way that I'm thinking about it.
Sure. I think to your point, the discussion aspect and feeling more confident in expressing your opinion in public is huge, not only when you have numbers on your side, but a lot of times you're in a very subjective discussion and you need to support your opinion and be respectful and assume positive intent and ensure that you're voiced and you understand and appreciate the other person's voice as well.
Yeah, that's sort of mindful communication and hearing people and being able to disagree in a way that's ultimately constructive. I think those are all really critical skills. I mean, you think about how many meetings people go to and how many important decisions are made as a group and in a collaborative environment. Certainly has a lot of relevance for career. And so, as you think about, prospective students listening to this podcast, you were once a prospective student not so long ago. What would you want them to know about Darden?
Darden is a place that encourages you to explore, to challenge yourself, and challenge yourself can be vague because you can take on more work, and that's one way to challenge. But another way to challenge yourself is to question your why. Like, what are your beliefs? how are you shaping into the leader that you think you want to become? Are you becoming the person and leader that you want to become? I think Darden does a great job of appreciating that you're a human and you're not a business automaton who's going to crank out TPS reports. I think that you can probably find that in other programs, but Darden is very intentional about drawing out the human aspect of leadership and connecting that to doing great business out in the world.
Yeah, appreciate the office space reference. I think it's the first time it's been here on the podcast. Should be more often referenced. So it seems like a lot of the value for you, and just listening to your comments here, is around growing as a leader. Would you say that's right? Absolutely. So you think about where you started in the program, as a leader, and where you hope to end up, where would you ideally like to be after the program, sort of beyond? What are your goals when you think about your growth as a leader? Realize that's a big question, but we do think Darden is a leadership school at its bedrock. Case Method's a great example of that, and many others. But just curious to hear.
Sure. What do I want to be when I grow up? I think I'd like to leverage everything I've learned from consulting and finance in a capacity that reshapes the way that communities interact. And that may seem big and broad and audacious. The thing that struck me about Kenya is what kept them from accelerating as quickly as the U.S. was access to the monetary velocity, the way money circulates in the global economy. They were pretty insular in terms of how they traded. Why? But why? There's a way to connect those communities to our community, and everyone can benefit. And as a leader, I'd like to take these small business interactions and compound them into a way that everyone can benefit from global trade. And that might be in a tiny aspect now of shipping organic pesticides around the world. That may be in some capacity of making sure capital is allocated to the right venture that's going to make the world smaller, more efficient, and hopefully better.
It's fascinating to think about, ultimately, how technology can play a role in that monetary velocity, as you describe. We had a conversation after you returned from Kenya about, in many ways, I think maybe African economies are more sophisticated when it comes to payment, models, and a lot of conversation about cell phone and cell phone usage and how businesses transacted, how you pay for things over there. And I think you had some firsthand experience just seeing that. That has to be, when you think about sort of the world and investment, that has to be exciting, when you think about the potential for a place like Kenya.
Absolutely. A funny connection point for class versus reality. I'd come back from Nairobi, and one of the first cases we had in LR1 was Safaricom. So that was a really, really eye-opening aspect of how global businesses become. And yeah, when you go to Kenya, farmers will literally trade chickens from their cell phone, right? They're buying gas. They're doing all types of financial transactions, sending money all over the country through their cell phones. And they don't have to be big, fancy smartphones. They are sometimes flip phones that they're able to send a text and wire money.
It's amazing. So people always enjoy the stories. So tell us just a little bit. I'm sure some of our prospective students, if they apply and decide to matriculate at Darden, may get to read Safaricom. But tell us just a little bit about that case.
Sure. I think we were ultimately making a decision on maybe it was whether to allocate more capital to that investment. Mm-hmm. And without giving the case away,
yeah, sure.
I think that there were some growth data numbers that were included. There was some historical data and the potential expansion into potential other geographies and avenues. And I believe that what came out of the discussion in the case was international investing is always going to be labored with another layer of risk. Mm-hmm. And there's always a way to think about a company from a U.S. perspective, the dominant Western perspective, and there's also a way of thinking about it from the local perspective as well.
Yeah, gosh, that seems tremendously relevant for your startup.
Absolutely.
So, one last question as we wrap up here. So, I'm fascinated by your startup because you think about sort of the conversation around pesticides and how food is raised and grown, and particularly people's desire for organic produce. Obviously realize that there's a lot of steps between where you are and being fully to market. But what gets you excited about the startup?
For a numbers guy, if a farmer is making $200 per month and them being able to repurpose for a higher yield, higher margin good gives them the opportunity to make $1,200 per month. That to me is life-changing, but for them, it might be life-changing for their kids and their children's children. That's the reason I think, as crazy as this little startup is, that I'm still involved.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Brett. Likewise.
And that was my conversation with Ron Cook, a student in our class of 2020. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we are all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's ExecMBA @darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, thanks for listening.